Speakers, dear participants. Okay, dear speakers, dear participants, good morning. I congratulate the organizers of this initiative, and I also welcome the conference and express satisfaction for having the opportunity to give my very modest contribution. We are now initiating the first panel of the conference, and my knowledge of the speakers gives me the clear notion that we will be opening the panel's component of the conference with a golden key. The topic of our panel is struggle for sphere of influence among great powers in Greater Eurasia. In my view, it is a very pertinent and interesting topic, also because it's a very open one. Does such struggle really exist? How is it expressed? Who are the competitors? Great powers? Who exactly are them? And how should Greater Eurasia be defined? These are some possible framing questions. To discuss the issue, our panel associates 5 distinguished speakers that, based on the available information, I will try to present very briefly, apologizing for eventual errors and shortages. Professor Adrian Pogacian, an important consultant and an international and independent China strategist, and a visiting professor in both the Metropolitan University Business School and the Sun Yat-sen University Business School. Professor Urban-Jakša, sorry about the pronunciation, from the Portuguese ISCTE. Professor Adrian Pogacian from the MGIMO University in Russia. Professor Maria João Tomás, our colleague as a professor and a researcher here at the Lisbon Autonomous University, and Professor Ekrem from Cesran. They will offer us 5 interventions, and in order to preserve a reasonable Q&A period, I will allocate 15 minutes for each of the interventions, requesting this time limit to be respected. Keep in mind that I'm an old soldier, so time is my business. It's also my business. Starting from now, I ask our participants to formulate their questions via chat, eventually indicating the speaker of the speakers to whom the question is addressed. Of course, later, it will be also possible to intervene by raising your hand, and please make them short. And without further ado, I give the floor to Professor Adrian Pogacian. Please, the floor is yours.
First of all, let me make sure that time limits. You said 15 minutes, 15 minutes,
right? 15 minutes for each intervention.
15 minutes. For the presentation. For the presentation. Well, let me start my share my presentation. Can you see it? Can you see it?
Not yet.
Oh, because I'm now on full screen. Let me try to do it. Let me. Oh yeah. I need to. What do I need to do? Share screen. Yeah. Okay. Here it is. Share.
Now it's apparently it's okay now.
It's okay now. Okay.
Yes.
Now, well, in 15 minutes, I need to be rather quick. Let me try to broaden the screen if possible. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, I'll start by describing the world we're in at that sort of inflection point. As you can see and really witness the kind of distortions of the world order we have been experiencing since the Second World War, when there was an American-led liberal order reasonably in place. But in recent decades, this kind of world order is subject to a lot of disruptions. First of all, the globalization is, there are various other paradigm shifts, questioning the so-called sacred cows like globalization, demographics, and even climate change is sometimes being doubted. Even globalization, according to some countries, it only benefits the multinationals at the expense of some of the poorer countries who are not able to negotiate for a fair deal. And even the capitalism is being called into question as it increases inequality and also affects the stability of societies. Again, there's a rise of populism in many places around the world. Authoritarianism, apparently authoritarian states or deeming to be authoritarian states are on the ascendant. And of course, there are simmering regional tensions around the world, from North Korea now to the Middle East. And climate change, of course, is also adds an uncertain dimension. And then the disruptive power of digitization is now causing fractures in how business are conducted, how they're being regulated, and so on. And of course, we have a new generation of millennials who are expert in using social media to disrupt the kind of order imposed by various nation states. And according to certain survey, below 50% public trust in Western democratic governments, as Western democratic governments suffer from fractures in their internal kind of social contract, calling into question their ability to govern, if not to impose order to the rest of the world. And of course, the recent use of sanctions, indiscriminate use of sanctions, tend to weaken the credibility of the dollar and providing a further shock to the world order. And China is rising, the East is rising, and in fact, that the great deal of global growth is driven by developing countries. And the world's dynamics seem to be moving from the West to the East. Amongst all these dynamics, China is now becoming the center of the global supply and value chain, for better or for worse, including the kind of sudden realization that even global medical supplies, a lot of them are manufactured in China. But of course, this coincides with a China sense of Renaissance, because in the ancient history, for the past several millennia, the biggest country and the biggest nation in the world have been China and India for millennia. And of course, with the national consciousness of a century of humiliation at the hands of foreign aggression, where China is being dismembered by Western states, which led to Xi Jinping's evocation of the China dream, how China could embark on its road of the national renaissance, marked by the so-called centenary goals, building a moderately well-off society by the year 2021, and building a strong, democratic, and the socialist country by the turn of the century, which is the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Now, China's growth influence is driven by a number of factors, including 5G, and also big data, artificial intelligence, its recent discovery of methane hydrates in the South China Sea, which could supply nearly 100 years of energy if properly exploited. And China is now very proactive, embracing climate change and in hydropower, solar power, driving China to be seemingly a green superpower. In terms of space, also has made tremendous strides. In terms of the military, is able to exert its so-called A2AD, anti-access area denial capabilities in the South China Sea. And even American military thinkers are thinking the American seems to be losing its control in the Asian Pacific. This is added to China's very ambitious program with the Belt and Road Initiative, including an Arctic element as the Arctic melts with climate change. And of course, China is building international institutions like the AAIB, the New Development Bank, and it's all over Africa. And now with the fall of Afghanistan, with the American retreat, China would have additional space in the Middle East. Now, China's rise is perceived to be threatening Western-dominated liberal order on a number of fronts, including human rights. But again, the West is pushing back with the Quad. But again, this is not going to change China's dominance economically, exemplified by the world's largest trading bloc, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And questions are being asked whether we are seeing the end of Pax Americana and American exceptionalism as the American perceived failures on a number of fronts, not including, of course, the financial crisis, the recent retreat from Afghanistan. All the while, all the international institutions like the United Nations, the G20, or the G7 do not seem to be fit for purpose anymore, restoring a kind of more stable world order. And even Americans' allies are being provoked, offended, at least by even under the Biden administration unilateralism with the so-called AUKUS, Australia, UK, and the US, forming a kind of nuclear submarine alliance. And of course, we're familiar with the so-called the Thucydides trap, when a superpower is threatened by rising power. In 12 or 16 cases, it ended up in war. But at the end of the day, China is still not strong enough or capable enough or even willing to supplant the United Nations world order, because the world order has benefited China hugely. Is more consumed with building the so-called China dream, building a kind of shared prosperity. So it seems the world is crying out for a more stable order beyond US hegemony and the United Nations. And it brings me to the history of the concept of Europe from the 1815, where at that period, the Europe was fractured by the called rival states, and is being anchored in the Congress of Vienna, coming with a model of a multilateral consultation and also cooperation, but also allowing for competition in the name of the concept of Europe. And this model, I argue, could be borrowed in the present days. This does not it's not intended to replace the United Nations or the other regional organizations like the African Union, the ASEAN, and other places. But it proposes a kind of modus operandi which would ensure that only key issues are discussed by this steering group of leading powers, the United States, European Union, Russia, and China. And it's consultative, it's not decision-making, and would shun codified rules relying on dialogue, like the concept of Europe. It precludes a kind of using military force to coerce other nations, and only addressing major crises or reforms And then the members of this Council of Europe would reserve the right to take unilateral action alone or through coalitions, thereby preserving their own national sovereignty. But in principle, would endorse a norm-governed international order, but they would also embrace a realistic expectations, thus refusing to accept a kind of one size fits all kind of formula, but also while leeway in domestic governance and not trying to impose a one size fits all model to other countries. And the international system would exist characteristics of multipolarity, allowing for competition between the United States and China and other nations, but would each other would see each other's bottom line much more clearly. But leaving this kind of operational matters to the United Nations or other regional conferences or institutions. Now, all the members of this model would send permanent representatives of the highest diplomatic rank to the headquarters of this Council of Europe, perhaps in an independent nation like Switzerland. And then they would, the Council of Europe would work closely with the Arab League and ASEAN and various other international institutions. But it is not meant to be, as I said, replacing the United Nations. It's meant to address the kind of disagreement, which is like to fracture the existing world order and would bring the world to undesirable and escalating consequences. Now, I mentioned the order would consist of the United States, European Union, China, and Russia, because they all represent members of the National Security Council. So people were asking, why not include Japan and India? After all, Japan and India, the size of the economy are bigger than Russia. But I think that here it's important not to confuse size with global power. Even though India size economy is bigger than Russia, and Japan also, that they are not members of the UN Security Council, and they do not kind of tend to have a kind of a global sway in disrupting the global order that much. So I think that the concept of power would uphold co-competition, with both cooperation and competition, and try to avoid wars, because all sides would see each other's bottom line much more clearly and provides a platform for dialogue. And indeed, this is my last slide. The recent Secretary General in the current 76th session of the United Nations highlights a number of issues which countries can cooperate, leaving no one behind in kind of poverty relief, and promoting peace in region, and trying to avoid using coercive instruments like the military or even the dollar to disrupt other countries' internal stability. So I'd like to conclude by highlighting that this is no more than an idea, and this idea does not come from myself. In fact, it was first featured in the foreign policy by its a very esteemed director. But I tried to thresh it out, hopefully, provoke sort of encouraging more debate, because we are now in a very unstable world, in my view, and we need to revamp. We do not need to change the United Nations, but we need to indeed to have a forum, a very effective forum, a very high order, so that the countries which hold sway can have a ready channel, an established channel to establish others' red lines in a way, hopefully leading to a greater degree of peace and cooperation to address some of the issues the world is facing today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Leung, for your stimulating and really refreshing views. It's our second speaker is Professor Urban-Jakša, and please, the next 15 minutes are yours.
Thank you. I'll try to share my screen now. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Okay, now it's okay.
Yeah, okay. Let's go. So I won't be talking as much about great power politics themselves, but more about how a small, marginalized and marginal actor conceives of and navigates great power politics. So I'm talking about, this is the structure of my presentation. I'm talking about Abkhazia, which is a breakaway territory that is internationally considered part of Georgia. It lies in the northwest of Georgia, as you can see here. It's somehow couched between the Caucasus Mountains and the Black Sea. And these are some of the pictures from my field work there in 2015. This is the de facto border between Abkhazia and the rest of Georgia on the Inguri River. And then we have the virtually destroyed and ruined former building of the parliament, as well as some, I think this is Pitsunda, one of the tourist sites in Abkhazia. So I use the term de facto state. Here on the right side, you can see many other alternative concepts that are used. I don't want to get too much into terminology. It's just a pragmatic decision. I'm not a legal scholar, so I don't focus that much on the status. But I see Abkhazia and other de facto states as states first, and then in terms of how they function. Just a few introductory things. So basically, Abkhazia has been de facto independent since 1993, but only recognized by Russia and a handful of countries. Syria, most recent recognition. Vanuatu, for instance, recognized it and then changed its mind. Population, it's around 200,000. I think if you look at the official census, it gives a figure, it's from 2011, but it gives a figure of 240,000, which I think is exaggerated, and that's often the case. All these figures, the official figures, should be taken with a grain of salt. And also what is interesting is the ethnic composition, which is quite heterogeneous, as you can see, with the Abkhaz making perhaps a half of the population, if at all. It also has, contrary to what seems to be the prevailing opinion, quite lively domestic politics. So in 2004 elections, the Kremlin-backed candidate, Raul Khajimba, lost to Sergei Bagapsh. Then we had a revolution in 2014 where President Ankvab was deposed. He was deeply unpopular. And then the most recent twist was the 2019 presidential elections, during which the main opposition candidate, Aslan Jania, was poisoned, could not contest. Raul Khajimba, the incumbent, was elected, but the elections were then annulled due to alleged irregularities. And in the 2020 elections, Jania, who was poisoned and recovered, actually gained power. This is not I'm not going to do an extensive literature review, just a few points to let you know where I'm coming from. So I very much oppose the notion of pros and conflicts. So I think this is an ahistorical and static way of understanding these things and underestimates the risk of escalation. These conflicts do escalate, and if we need a reminder, we can just look at the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and what happened last year. It's also often Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Transnistria, Nagorno-Karabakh, and so on are seen as puppets, Russian puppets or satellite states that have zero agency basically. I think also here the literature is starting to show that there is quite a bit of agency there, despite dependence and restrictions. and that in some situations they're able to punch above their weight. The third misconception I would say that I try to tackle is that non-recognition is not just the restrictive and constraining factor, but can have benefits. Here I'm referring to the article by Richards and Smith, that they actually argue that sometimes if a state is not recognized, it has greater room for maneuvering, and it can dodge certain international rules and restrictions, and has more space, and can even be more creative in its institution building and state building. And I also try to avoid the trap of perceiving de facto states as sort of pawns in a great geopolitical game played by great powers. And here I take as inspiration, for instance, Alexander Schooley book on Central Asia, but I think it applies just as much to the Caucasus, where, as the title says, great games, local rules. Often these games between geopolitical giants are played according to local rules. My research questions are basically, I look at Abkhazia's foreign policy concept that was published last year, and look at what it can tell us about Abkhazia's foreign relations. I'm interested in the relationship between foreign relations and domestic politics in Abkhazia. And I'm also interested in how the principles of foreign policy reflected in the concept square with my own interview data, and how they square with the actual conduct of foreign policy, and also what we can expect to happen in the future in this field. Now, my methodology and my approach are based on constructivism and realism. I focus both on conceptions and on behaviors in foreign policy. And my methodology consists here, I draw on my doctoral research, which was more than 50 semi-structured elite interviews conducted between 2015 and 17 in Sukhumi, Tbilisi, Moscow, Brussels, and Washington, D.C. So these were either Abkhaz policymakers or their counterparts who engaged with them mostly informally, with the exception of Moscow, of course, where Russia recognized Abkhazia as an independent state. And then, of course, the content analysis of the foreign policy concept. Going straight into the concept of the foreign policy of the Republic of Abkhazia, this document was, this document was published as a decree of the president of the Republic of Abkhazia. It's interesting that it's in Russian only, and there's no, I haven't found an English translation, but I think that says something about the segregation of audience, or the ability of the Abkhaz to address different audiences, and I think language is a part of that strategy. It's a short document and has everything that you would expect in similar documents in other states. Even if we look at the real estate allocated to each country, they're talking about the relationships with different countries. We notice, and this is no surprise, that Russia is by far the most important actor, followed by Georgia, which of course pertains mostly to conflict resolution within the format of Geneva International discussions. And then we also, there's a bit of a surprise that Turkey is quite prominent, but knowing that Abkhaz diaspora is quite strong in Turkey, that's not that much of a surprise, but it's definitely, you can see that the EU, there's hardly any space allocated to the EU, and there's hardly any talk of the US or China, which is quite interesting. It paints quite a gloomy picture of international relations, sort of dominated by conflict and competition. And it also perceives the decline in EU and US power in the Caucasus, and at the same time, growth in Russian and Turkish power in the region. And in the language itself, the use of verbs is also quite interesting. I mean, it's a detail, but whenever the concept talks of the relations with the EU, the verb укрепление in Russian, which means strengthening or reinforcement, is used, giving a sort of a hint of kind of forcible shoring up. And then when it talks about relations with Russia, the verb развитие is used, which can be translated as development, but has a more connotation of a more natural progression. And when they talk about the relations with Georgia, they only use the verb урегулирование, which translates into settlement or resolution. So basically, the relations with Georgia can be reduced to this conflict resolution, and they don't want to have anything else to deal with them. When we talk about the process of basically publishing this foreign policy concept, it's quite interesting because when I was in Abkhazia in 2015, they were telling me, "Oh, it's ready. We're going to publish it within the next few months, if not weeks." Well, it took 5 years in the end. And so the question here is this due to internal disagreements, or is this a question of strategic ambiguity, perhaps wanting to delay the publication as much as possible? It was also quite interesting that after the concept was published, it went largely unnoticed in the wider world, even in the region, but it provoked a heated debate in Abkhazia itself, to the point that there were protests of the opposition, and the president felt obliged to amend the foreign policy concept this May in 2021, excluding the most provocative paragraph, which was the paragraph that I quoted here, on the possibility of creating conditions for the formation of an additional format of multi-level negotiations between Georgia and Abkhazia. So any kind of perceived concessions to the Georgian side are obviously very, very controversial. So the external-internal distinction in the fact of states is problematic, and foreign policy can often be a controversial domestic issue. And now here I'm actually squaring the data, the content analysis of the foreign policy concept with the interview data from my research. And we can notice basically a double strategy of proactive engagement when it comes to the EU and the US. And there's quite a bit of evidence of strong lobbying practices back in the day in the US, the period of 2008 to 2010 roughly. There's also quite a bit of resistance going actually towards self-isolation when strong pressure from Russia or even China to an extent was felt. And we seem to, we can perceive a shift from long-term objective of international recognition to short and medium-term objectives, focused more on engagement in culture and tourism, sports, for instance. And as I mentioned, audience segregation, also through the use of language. I think it's quite interesting that, you know, in this Waltian dilemma between balancing and bandwagoning, Abkhazia seems to be going from balancing, from an attempt to a multi-vector foreign policy towards more of a self-isolation. And this is, I would say, culturally conditioned by Apswara, which is a set of constitutive norms, an honor code, if you will, that makes it very difficult to accept the role of a junior partner. For instance, in an interview, the foreign former foreign minister told me that they are not interested in begging for recognition. So they will not stoop so low as to do that. And there's also, I would say, a syndrome of sour grapes. With few recognitions, recognition becomes less important for them, or at least they express it in this way. So the same individual stated that recognition does not really matter. We have recognized ourselves, and we were recognized by Russia. So that's it. Okay, basically my conclusions are that Abkhazia, rather than being a pawn in the geopolitical game of great powers, actively plays certain roles and tries to maximize its geopolitical potential, let's put it like that. It played the role of instability entrepreneur. It played the role, and still does, of the keeper of the status quo, since it effectively blocks or delays regional integration of Georgia into the EU and especially NATO. Between 2008 and roughly 2011, it played the role of an emulator when it tried to show the West, and especially the EU, that it is a responsible player and that it aims to abide by human rights standards and so on. And now I argue that more and more it plays the role of a tollman, so that it's trying to use its topographical features, geographical position, to play an important role in transit of natural resources. And for instance, it plans to open the railway link connecting Russia to Georgia, Armenia, and Turkey. And of course, that would be in the interest of Russia, in the interest of Turkey, and also in the interest of Armenia. I'll stop here, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing to our renewed attention the Abkhazian situation, so very often forgotten, so singular, I would say. Our next speaker is Professor Adrian Pogacian. He will address the topic, Did the European Union lost Eastern Europe? Great powers rivalry in regional dimension. Please, Professor Pogacian.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you again, Professor Pinto, after the Europe as a global actor in May. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because this is my ongoing research and it's devoted to this great power rivalry in the so-called Eastern Europe. I hope you can all hear me because I have some internet connection problems. And in this short presentation, I will talk about mostly about European Union and a little bit about Russia. And after the conference, the article will be sent completely. So just a second. Okay. I will read my resume. Our world is vast and complex. This is the unchanged thing of everyday reality. Events follow each other quickly. The entire international political environment being itself in a real Brownian movement, and paraphrasing a famous literary line, time seems to have no longer passion. The global turmoil caused by the refugee crisis and the new COVID-19 pandemic puts humanity before a real test of social cohesion, starting from the lowest level, the one of local communities. I will try to be objective in this presentation because I'm from Romania, so we are on the eastern part of Europe, so it will be maybe some nuances of subjectivism. In the international arena, political and diplomatic practice is influenced by the world order. Universal history indicates us that in the course of evolution, this order has changed several times. The year 1989, for example, brought important changes in international political practice, but the international system was not fundamentally transformed. From this point of view, today the great global game seems to be unfolding, although international politics is a reality that affects us all, from ordinary citizens to states and non-state actors. Europe, from the point of view of this reality, has been, and it is, under the pressure, internal and external. We cannot discuss and look into the sphere of international politics in particular, and of international relations in general, without taking account Europe, an important player in the evolution of international politics for at least half a millennium. Any analysis in the sphere of international relations cannot ignore Europe as a whole, the European Union and Russian federations, if we take into account the geopolitical theory of pressure points developed in the interwar period. But for a start, it is imperative to delimit geographically and not only the space of so-called Eastern Europe. Starting from the geopolitical theory of British Halford Mackinder, according to which whoever rules Eastern Europe rules the world, the region between Germany and Russia has been subject throughout history to different appearance, names, and state components. During the Cold War, it was generically called Eastern Europe, a mixture of different cultural and linguistic influences with values in places antagonistic, consisting of 7 satellite states of the former Soviet Union, to which was added the non-aligned Yugoslavia. Following the collapse of the Soviet Empire, the region was divided, following the enlargement of the European Union and the North Atlantic Alliance, into Central and Eastern Europe. It should be noted that this region has never been a geographical concept in itself, being considered only a geopolitical and or ideological notion. Thus, starting from the definition of this term by the United Nations, I mentioned the states I refer in this research: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Croatia, Kosovo, Northern Macedonia, Montenegro, Poland, Romania, Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Hungary. Most of these states are members of the European Union, while states such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Northern Macedonia, and Montenegro are considered candidate countries for possible accession. However, the word that marked the recent history of this geopolitical area is enlargement, although after the end of the Cold War, the term transition was most often used under all its meanings, including destructuring and chaos. The integration into the European Union of the states of Central and Southeastern Europe is still a heavily debated issue, oscillating between the need to expand European construction and the relative gain of the parties involved in this process. The construction of the European Union began, like NATO, for example, in the middle of the Cold War as a counterweight to the USSR, hence the institutional and bureaucratic gaps which depended over time. Although completed somewhat late in the period 2004-2007, the enlargement to the east of the European Union was a direct consequence of the changes following the fall of the Iron Curtain. The Union's expansion to the east of the European continent has been, and it is, an apparently natural move, but one that must deal with both internal and external threats. An important contemporary debate within the Union is about what it lacks in order to become a true world power. A possible answer is given by the Vice President of the European Commission, Maroš Šefčovič, who stated in an interview that the European Union is a superpower of regulations, the #1 provider of development aids, but lacks consensus in sensitive policy decisions because it takes a very long time due to the unanimity criterion. It takes a lot of time until an unanimously accepted conclusion. From the point of view of, for example, the Russian foreign policy analysts, throughout the voice of Fyodor Lukyanov, the European construction has a double imperialist connotation. On the one hand, They believe that the Union is in fact the result of the integration promoted by the United States of America, which wants to have a foothold in the promotion of global capitalism. On the other hand, the European Union is an instrument that allows the great powers in the west of the continent to pursue their interests in a way that they could not longer practice individually. Moreover, there is a tendency to believe that the West, and especially the European Union, is at the losing end of the battle for a fair and lasting world order. As a result, the EU's influence in the world risks to fade away, and this would have a negative impact not only on European construction, but also on international democracy, because democracy is an effort which does not mean the power of citizens, but on the contrary means limiting the power of legislators, and in our case, of the great powers. The EU should therefore regain its reputation and take a pragmatic stance vis-à-vis Moscow, for example. Sanctions are a necessary but sufficient tool. The Union, as an aspirant to the status of a great world power, can and must offer much more. This is because today the Kremlin is able to undermine EU action by providing member states with short-term and medium-term economic benefits, for example. Another extremely important aspect is illustrated by the Russian influence within the European Union, which is a powerful tool for dividing European construction. In its desire to become a great power again, Russia had no choice but to confront and divide the EU, which it seems to have succeeded if we just take a look at the latest regional and world realities. The EU also has tools that can influence the Kremlin's policies, but in the case of Moscow, this approach is a success. So this task or this paper is, as I already mentioned, an ongoing research. And as a partial conclusion, at the end of my presentation, I would like to say that even though we from the eastern part of Europe, we have significant lack of development in cooperation with the Western Europe, the west part of Europe. We cannot discuss about a divided Europe or European Union, and the future for the states from Central and Eastern Europe is within the European Union, but the great game and the other great powers like US and China try to influence this region of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Interesting your association of Eastern Europe with the geopolitical concept of heartland. That opens to many debates. I anticipate that. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
And now, Professor Maria João Tomás, please, dear colleague, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'm trying to share the screen. Just a minute. Here we are. I hope to pull full screen. Yes. Okay, this is based on my article or part of a book, international book, which is The Era of the Dragon, how China is preparing to be the world's top economy in the 21st century. The book is the empirical aspects of strategic trade negotiations and management. It's available on this site. And this is the results, the presentation of this paper. China, home of the almost of the fifth of the world's population. This Chinese domestic market is an important protection bubble for the Chinese economy, and this is quite important because it's a kind of economic security they have. China GDP has consistently grown 10% in 2020, and the pandemic slowed down to 6%. 2.3, and the world average at the same time was 3.3. So this, I think it's a small example of what is happening in the China economy. It has the world's unicorns available in $1 billion. Half of the patents of the world intellectual patents are there. And recently he bought Volvo and make investments in Lenovo from IBM and others investments around the world she's buying. It's the world's second largest economy by 2020, getting closer and closer to the leader, the United States. And look at the rent, the inflation rate is stable during, and the forecast will be this one. So it's very important figures. The value, it was the largest exporter and the largest carrier foods of the planet. These are the importers of China, so the exporters of goods that China exports to the rest of the world. Even during the pandemic, it has a huge rate. China's leading important partners by value in 2019 are Asian, European Union, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, United States, Brazil, Russia, South Africa, India, and Hong Kong. And to achieve and to increase these numbers, China has made this huge plan, BRI, the Belt Road Initiative, started to be thinking in 2014 and will be available to, will start function in 2023, I'm sorry, 2023, so tomorrow, almost tomorrow. We must be prepared for this because it will be a huge change. The BRI, the Belt Road Initiative, were $50 billion, involved 66 countries, 4 billion of people, 40% of the world economy. It will have an economy impact of $21 trillion and has a direct investment of $1 trillion. China rejects this analogy, but it is 13 times more the value, the volume of the Marshall Plan, or the value of the Marshall Plan. This is huge. To build this, China made a lot of cooperation agreements. One of the most important will be for the Arctic, as our colleague told Long, I think it was Long who said that the Arctic is melting, so it will be easier to pass here. The main proposal is, has always was to reach Europe and to break the isolation of China for the west side. For all these routes, China made a lot of agreements, and pay attention to this one here from Pakistan. It's a railway and a deep water port here, who leads to the Arabic Sea and then to Suez Canal. And this is important in Pakistan due to what is happening in Afghanistan. We may understand a little bit the interest of China in this region. It is now talking that China will be able to make agreement in Afghanistan with the Taliban to increase this investment in Afghanistan, part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So this explains a little bit what is happening in the world, geopolitics, and what will happen in 2023. I think Leung spoke about this. And this will change a little bit of the powers we have now, and we might understand that China will be a power we will not be able to forget, and we must include in a lot of world decision. So pay attention to this. Asia share of the world economy is aggregate, and this is they are growing. This Asia economy, despite of the pandemic, it became stable. China, India, Thailand are the main actors of this region, and pay attention here. China volume grown regions. China was one of the leading one. Vietnam, Indonesia is recovering now. Malaysia had problems, but is recovering. And so as Thailand and Philippines. The most amazing thing about this graphic is that China never went down. Always it slowed down, but never went to negatives. And this makes us think the importance of China economy and how they are leading with it. This is another graphic about the exports and imports and world, and we see that China is leading. I think not in most long distance we'll have China leading the world's economy. Let's see by regions in the planet what is happening. In the Middle East, China is depending of the energy hydrocarbons from the Middle East. This depending is trying to. China is trying to invert this dependence, trying to make a clean energy without hydrocarbons, without gas or oil. But because in the Belt Road Initiative, they are not, they try not to use much more oil or gas, and they will try to use green energy. That's one of the things they told, and one of their commitments. But in the meantime, the dependence of the China in the Middle East is this. The China dependence on energy imports from the Middle East is great and huge at the moment still. Number of Chinese contract workers in the Middle East, it's also big, but the most important, I think, is this graphic. Chinese contribution of troops and other personnel to UN peacekeeping operations in the Middle East. This shows that how the importance and the presence of China in the Middle East. It was a surprise for me when I wrote this paper and I was making this investigation. I couldn't imagine these numbers. In Africa, China's presence, as we know, in Africa in many countries, due one part of the Belt and Road Initiative, especially in the east side of Africa, the east coast of Africa, but it's all over Africa, as you can see, or spread all over Africa. Africa top economy partners, China became one of the most important partners in Africa, and this leads to another important issue or question, or because China puts workers, Chinese workers on their investments. There's a lot of Chinese people in Africa. This is the agreement with Angola, the agreement with Mozambique. The trade with China reached $2.5 billion in 2018. This is an example of the importance of China in Angola and the help they made with the pandemic, during the pandemic times. This leads to this problem. The influx of Chinese workers tries to generate tensions with the residents. China dominance in the region has also been criticized and challenged. And the response, the reaction of China was this. This is what we call interculturality. It's an intelligence way to integrate into make people feel comfortable with a diverse society. They say the interculturality is the key to integrate society, and China is doing that. Despite being criticized, or because it was criticized by the dominance of Chinese workers in Africa, they tried to do this. You see Chinese girls with Mozambique costumes, and here you see, I think it's a Mozambique boy trying to learn one of martial arts of China. So even at this point, China is doing their work to be the leading world's economy, because it's important when you have this ambition that you must be accepted, especially in the countries where you have investments, because there are the local people who made the hard work for you, or the hard work for not being rejected, because you must be accepted in the regions you made investments, so they must be successful, or in order to be successful. So China is very smart in this point to make this interculturality effort to be accepted in places or in regions where they have workers or where they have investments. And remember also this one, the personal peacekeeping, the troops on the ground that China has in the Middle East. So in order to keep safe their investments. You have also that in Pakistan, where China has a huge, a lot of troops there. You have also that in other regions, or the conflicts can appear, or it's necessary to have security. So China puts boots on the ground in these places to avoid problems and to keep their investments safe. This is a problem. And that's very curious also. China is offering government scholarships to students. So you can see here the rise numbers of students, African students studying in China. As we all know, education is a powerful weapon, and China is doing their work also So they are giving scholarships to the African students so they can study in China. Know the China culture, know the China way of life, and this is a way to accept and to accept what China is doing and the investments China is doing in Africa. As I said, they were criticized. Now they are accepted and welcome. This makes a problem. This makes a problem. This is the Quds that makes a problem for the United States. And the first step perhaps was Biden, but Trump was already doing that, and Obama thought about that, to take off the troops from Afghanistan. The reason for that, of course, it was very expensive in the first place. And the second place, perhaps United States is no longer more dependent on the foreign or oil and the foreign presence in the Middle East. It's no longer very important because United States are exporters of oil, especially gas, because of the schistol gas. And that perhaps might be of course the leading reason was it was very expensive even for human lives, as I said, it started to be thought on during the Obama time. Trump made the first conversations, and then Biden executed them. Perhaps the other reason was also that the interest and the main concern of Biden and the United States, it's no longer the Middle East, it's China and Asia. And that's why the recent AUKUS for the submarines and the recent connection with the Quds. Here we have India, China, Australia, and the United States. Shows that United States are aware that China will be in perhaps 2022 or 2023 the leading economy of the world. So they are trying to shift.
Can I ask you to please be as brief as possible?
Okay, I'm finishing. I'm finishing. This is the response of the United States to the China attempt to be the world's economy of the world. As I showed the figures, the numbers that led us to think that probably China is right and she wants to be the leading economy of the world. And I think she will.
Not China.
Sorry? A freelancer somewhere. Okay, let's move on. Okay, thank you, Professor Maria João Tomás. You have given us a comprehensive perspective of what could be what you have called the era of the dragon and its rationale. Allow me only a very small comment. It's easy to understand Chinese interest in Afghanistan, but to take the Taliban as a reliable partner is yet to be seen.
Yes, that's what I think also. Wait and see, because they are very dangerous partners. And unstable partners, because they say one thing and the next side they say another thing. They do another thing. So
okay,
wait and see. Wait and see.
Thank you so much. Our final, but certainly very important speaker is Professor Ekrem Ok. Please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Hello. Good afternoon to all. It is nice to be here. First of all, I need to very thanks for organizing committee and all partners institution to providing such an academic platform to us. And let me share my screen. Okay, everybody's okay with
Yeah.
presentation?
No. I must finish mine. No, sorry.
It's okay. You can see.
Yes,
you can
we
see your
see.
screen, please.
Yes, please
Okay.
go on.
Okay. Humanitarian intervention is one of the last decades' outstanding concept, which raised controversies both when it happens and when it doesn't. It has emerged from the question of do human rights violation in a state concern other states and refer to military intervention by a third country, a group of countries, or an international organization to internal affairs of a country with or without consent of the country. As countries intervene for humanitarian purpose, the discussion on HI have become fiercer and sharper. As a result of this discussion, several opposing views have emerged, such as intervention versus sovereignty, intervention versus non-intervention, or human rights versus international order. Although you can see these verses in different names, this debate is essentially among those who think serious human rights violation should be intervened. Sorry.
Please.
Can you ban this? Because
prevent from writing on the screen, Alexa.
It would be troll, maybe.
Please go on, but I ask our colleague Alexa to prevent from writing on the screen.
Okay. Although you can see these verses in different names, but this debate essentially among those who think serious human rights violation should be intervened and those who thinks it shouldn't intervene with the domestic affairs. And we prefer to call them interventionists and non-interventionists. These verses flourished spontaneously because using the concept of sovereignty when opposing HI has led to natural contrast between the humanitarian intervention and national sovereignty terms. And the point is the support of the international public opinion. Support for these two views has changed over time. The idea of intervention was dominant after the Cold War, but it has lost its support in time. Especially the interventions in the field led to significant change in the balance between two camps. And at this stage, the question is, what are the turning points that led the wind of the change? We have identified three turning points regarding this debate. The first is 1991 Iraq intervention, which the concept of humanitarian intervention started to receive generous support. And the second is 2003 Iraq intervention, in which wind began to turn non-interventionist. And last, the 2011 Libya intervention, in which humanitarian intervention concept lost of confidence and one of its most important arguments. And before the turning points, it will be useful to mention about argumental debate briefly. We classified arguments for humanitarian intervention from ethical and legal perspective. Ethical arguments represent a normative perspective on why other states should intervene in the case of human rights violation. And these arguments are the strong side of the humanitarian intervention because these arguments are the revealer of the humanitarian intervention. In other words, these arguments are the primary reason for the emergence of the HI. And also, these are the only arguments that non-interventionists couldn't undermine. Non-interventionists have raised really compelling criticism against humanitarian intervention, but they still cannot answer the question like, what is to be done when a community faces a threat of massacre or genocide? Or what is to be done when a state is unwilling or unable to halt a humanitarian crisis within its territory? Because it is not moral to say, let them die. Legal arguments have emerged as a counter-argument against the non-interventionist argument that imply humanitarian intervention is illegal. But these arguments are mainly about the legal problem will be resolved over time, sovereignty is out of the date, and humanitarian intervention is legitimate even if not legal. Also, humanitarian intervention do not violate but comply with the United Nations Charter, especially some article like 1.3, 13 and 55C and 56, and especially the chapter 7. But I need to underline one of the arguments in detail. The non-interventionist says humanitarian intervention clearly violates Article 2.4 of the United Nations that prohibits threat of use of force against any country. But Simon Duke underlines the clause of the territorial integrity and political independence in this sentences, because he says humanitarian intervention has nothing to do with the state's territorial integrity or political independence. It just aims to solve humanitarian crisis in the target country. So there is no violation. But on the other hand, we did also classify them under 3 main topics. Humanitarian intervention, problem of abusing, and the second is uselessness of the humanitarian intervention, and lastly, legality of the humanitarian intervention. The problem of abuse, humanitarian intervention vulnerability to abuse is one of the most important arguments of the non-interventionists. And there are 2 proofs for this abuse. First is double standard in the intervention. Interveners are treating countries differently under the same circumstances. In other words, they are pick and choose. The second proof is that interventions are asymmetrical. Because when we talk about the humanitarian intervention, we actually mean an intervention of the powerful actor to the weak one, not the vice versa. The second problem of uselessness, in some, humanitarian intervention cannot solve existing problem, but often make things worse. The legal matters, they argue that humanitarian intervention is illegal and interfering in any country's territorial integrity or political independence is criminal act. And sovereignty doesn't deserve to be discrediting. Sovereignty has contributed significantly to maintenance of the international order and justice for the last 4 centuries. And now, milestone of the debate. In this section, I will focus on the effect of the case on the debate, not the case. The first milestone, 1991 Iraq intervention. Operation Provide Comfort was carried out to protect Kurdish rebels who escaped Saddam Hussein's force to Turkey-Iran borders after the Gulf War. This operation was started with the 26,000 personnel, and north of the 36 parallel was proclaimed as a no-fly zone. Due to this effort, the Iraq army withdrew from the region. Iraq intervention marks the beginning of the decade between 1991 and 2000, which is considered the golden age of the humanitarian intervention. This intervention may have an adverse effect in the long term, maybe, but it is clear that this intervention saved those rebel groups and prevent Saddam government from committing a massacre. For this reason, the Iraq intervention was regarded as a successful intervention and led to start of the golden age for the humanitarian intervention concept. The second intervention, we think Iraq has a special meaning for the concept of humanitarian intervention because the golden age starts with an Iraq intervention and ends with another Iraq intervention. Actually, it is hard to count Iraq intervention as a humanitarian intervention because this intervention doesn't even meet the most basic criteria, but we regard it as a second milestone for 2 reasons. The first reason is the United States resort to humanitarian reason for the legitimation of the intervention. The second is the intervention has unusual effect on the debate. For the first reason, at the beginning of the intervention, the main reason for the intervention were allegation of the Iraq stockpile of the WMDs and linked to Al-Qaeda. But these allegations start to undermine support for the intervention because no WMDs and no severe links with the terrorism were discovered. After that, administration need to new and robust justification, which is liberation of the Iraq. Regarding the second reason, this intervention has notable effect on the humanitarian intervention debate. I can show some example. Fernando Cesran says, Iraq war reignites the passionate about the humanitarian intervention debate, and Aidan Heger say, this intervention have dealt a significant blow to status of humanitarian intervention. And also Gareth Evans argued that Iraq intervention almost choked emerging 10 R2P at birth. Moreover, this intervention was severely criticized even during and after the intervention. For example, human rights violation during the intervention and apologies of the Tony Blairs after the intervention. All this strengthens the opinion that Iraq intervention was a case of abusing humanitarian intervention. We argue that misuse of the humanitarian justification in the Iraq seriously harmed confidence in humanitarian intervention and led to the end of the golden age for the humanitarian intervention. Second to third milestone, Libya, we all witnessed the Arab Spring process. Because of this, I don't want to bore you with the detail before the intervention. We accept the Libya intervention as a third milestone because this intervention have an essential place for the humanitarian intervention debate in terms of its result. Because Libya intervention has shown us that humanitarian intervention not just limited to stop human rights violation, they can also be determinants in the country's political future. This intervention helped the opponents to win against better equipped and trained Gaddafi force. Let me show you. Some reports claim that NATO bombers aimed at the Libyan force, weaken it before rebels move in, and they attack retreating Libyan force, which is not a threat. And also they bombed Gaddafi's hometown, where there was no conflict. Due to this aid from the interveners, Gaddafi's offer for ceasefire, negotiation, and settlement were always rejected by the opponents. In short, this intervention that was supposed to be stop violence, in the end intensified the violence and nullified the peace opportunities. As a conclusion, theoretical debate is important, yes, but the effect of the case on the humanitarian intervention debate is enormous. The effect of the case also clear in the post-intervention events. For example, after the Iraq intervention, the assemblant leaders reject this section of the Tony Blair's draft supporting the principle of R2P. And Germany had previously supported the R2P, but after the Iraq intervention, reject the Blair's memorandum on R2P. And after the Iraq intervention, the intervention or any action call for Syria are mostly vetoed by the Russia and China with the excuse that it can lead a regime change like in Libya. Even if Russia and China have an economic, political, or strategic reason to oppose intervention in Syria, but the Libya intervention also all of them to have a new rigid excuse. And lastly, is that really humanitarian intervention has nothing to do with the state territorial integrity or political independence. Libya intervention show us humanitarian interventions also can be determinant in the political future in the country. And Libya intervention not just undermine one of the interventionist critical arguments, but also gave a new compelling argument to non-interventionists, which is humanitarian intervention can cause regime change. And it will be hard to fix it, but Libya was an opportunity to fix the 2003 Iraq interventionist damage on the HI. But the cases we examined show that despite the rise in the humanitarian interventionist theoretical support, the primary determinant for the support for humanitarian interventionists is interventions in the fields. The problem of abuse harms confidence in the concept of the humanitarian intervention. But can we say everything is over for the humanitarian intervention? No, because concept of humanitarian intervention might rise again, because the moral questions are still valid and robust. But it first need to meticulous codification to handle current problem. And that's all. Thank you for listening. This is all for now, but I will be here if you have a question or comments or any feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have raised many relevant points for better reflection concerning humanitarian intervention. Okay, now we have limited time for debate. Let's take the most of it with your common understanding. I only have one question on chat, but of course, if someone else wishes to raise a question, he wishes to put a question, can of course raise his hand. The question I have on chat comes from Christian Proberges, and I will read it. Chinese boots on the ground to support BRI investment, yet there is a lot of discussion that actual private Chinese security companies are providing this service, not the People Liberation Army. What's your opinion on it? I assume that this question goes to Professor Maria João Tomé, please. Sorry, we cannot hear you.
No, you can listen to me.
Okay.
My opinion about this is the strategic of China, the strategy of China to make secure these their investments, and that's a way to be sure that they can get what they want and that their private investments are safe. So it's amazing to see how many troops private China companies and even the government of China has on the ground on the countries. They have investments, and it's also amazing to see how many boots on the ground China has in special places like Pakistan, example. This has a little bit what the interest of Pakistan and what is happening in this region, and that's a way of China to make sure that they have control of the situation.
Thank you so much. Now I have two other questions on the chat and one raised hand on my screen. I will give the floor to Professor Leung question. Would Professor Tomás address the question whether China will grow old before becoming rich?
That's your question for me?
Yes.
Yes, can you repeat please again?
Yes. The question is whether China will grow old before becoming rich.
Oh, that's a good question, because this huge investment, I don't know how they are going to have the return of it. So that's a big question, because the huge investment they have in the road belt investment, it's so big that the return of it will be quite a question to wait and see what will happen. So there is a lot of money involved in this. I don't know really if they can be rich with all these investments they want. And we see one thing, that China never makes decisions without thinking very much on that. They are long-term decisions. They are not short-term decisions. They are medium decisions. They are long-term decisions. They are very well thought, very well planned. And I think Xi Jinping hopes that China will be rich with all this investment. One thing it's important, and I didn't refer that the poverty rate in China has decreased for 30% or 20%. I have the numbers here, but they have decreased to numbers that were never thought 10 years ago, or perhaps 15 years ago. Especially the parts of China, they are not on the cities. You know, there are a lot of poverty there, but the poverty rate decrease in China. I think I have the numbers. But I can tell you it is the minimums of that China had in a long time. So, but I have the numbers here.
800 million.
Thank you.
Okay. Professor Leung, I understood that you wish to make a small comment.
Yes, yes. In
Please
fact,
do it.
the reason why I raised this question is not because of the Belt and Road. China's growing old has got nothing to do with the Belt and Road. It's because of China's demographics, because there's a lot of old people because of the one-child policy. And so the productive labor is decreasing very rapidly. And long time has passed since the so-called Louise curve, whereby a lot of working people, the proportion is decreasing so much, so that impact on China's trying to get rich in per capita GDP terms compared with other advanced countries. That's my point.
Okay, thank you so much. I still have 2 questions on the screen, and a second question from Professor Liu. With your permission, I will give you the floor at the very last, so because you are already at your opportunity. So 3 questions. Perhaps we will not have time for more. And the first question goes for Mr. Faik Hassan, please.
Yes, thank you, sir. My question is for Dr. Tomás. Is it that US has intentionally provided a base or opportunity to other powers to intervene? I mean, if we see US policy towards Africa, Asia, or Pakistan, I feel that due to strategic political compulsions, US has provided a base opportunity to other powers to intervene. So it's China who is doing what other needs. What's your comments on that?
Can you repeat, please, again, the last part?
I mean, US has provided an opportunity to other powers to intervene. If China is building infrastructure in Africa or in Asia, is it that US has provided an opportunity to other? Because the policy of US towards Africa is quite ambiguous. They have never supported an infrastructure-led policies in the region.
Yes, that's quite a good point, because US doesn't have many investment in Africa, and Africa is the big continent in the world, so the biggest continent in the world. So it's a part of USA foreign affairs that is neglected, and I think China is getting power, is gaining power there. The point is that China needs Africa, and why it needs Africa? Not only for the Belt Road investment, the Belt Road, because it needs some points there to make access to the Suez Canal, and it's part also of the Belt Road, but by the sea. So it needs Africa, it needs parts of Africa, and knows also that Africa has a lot of goods that he needs, that China needs, and that's why China is present there. For the US concerns, I think USA is much more concerned now about what is happening in China and China Sea, and that in Asia, is because of the economic growth of Asia, and they fear that they can't go and be aware of what is happening there. That's why they move. That's why it happens with AUKUS. That's why it's happening Quad recently. And the geostrategic is moving towards Asia, and US is neglecting Africa, and I think it will cost at the medium time a lot for US. I think US will regret not to have investments in Africa in the medium time.
Thank you so much. So please now, Scott Luke's short question for a short answer, please.
Thank you very much for the interesting talks. A quick question. which I hope anyone can chip in on in these great areas of research. How do you guard against propaganda and disinformation in your area of research? And I'll just throw out a few examples. For example, the propaganda that responsibility to protect is simply an attempt to infringe on a country's sovereignty, or the line that Chinese lines from the fact that pictures to say there's absolutely no problem with integration in Africa, or to deny that there's any issue with the Uyghur population in Northwest China as part of its great upward lift, or, for example, the disinformation denying chemical attacks in Syria, or, for example, a document in Abkhazia, which is a statement of foreign policy, but which being written in Russia may not be a statement of foreign policy approaches as much as a presentation document for a particular audience. How do you work through that line between propaganda and disinformation to try to establish a productive analysis?
Okay, who wishes to answer?
Yes, well, I think you're quite right. There is a lot of this information.
If I may interrupt you, please, you can also elaborate here on your pending question centered on the principle of responsibility to protect. It's in order to save time, okay?
Okay. I asked the question on the screen about the distinction between intervention and responsibility to protect, because the responsibility to protect is a long-held kind of principle, but it doesn't mean translate. It cannot be conflated with the kind of intervention in Iraq, Afghanistan, and various other places. Okay, so that's my point. The second point I like to answer to Scott Lucas' very insightful question, because especially that's why we need forum like this. We need to hear a lot of kind of views from different experts, and I think that we need to study the issue very in depth and not be deluded by people speaking from where they sit. For example, the war on terror, we heard someone in the United Nations holding a jar of what is supposed to be weapons of mass destruction. So how do you know that this is the truth until the very end? And then, of course, about the question about Xinjiang, about Hong Kong, where I'm sitting, I think there is a lot of disinformation. I'm now sitting where I am, feeling very free, and never feel so free before. So this rhetoric about Hong Kong being trampled, and then the one country, two system being completely, sort of trashed and trampled upon, you need to really be there and really studying various aspects of the problem. And I think that we need to be very careful with data as well. For example, the reference to China's economy growing at 10% per annum is not true. It's slowing down already a couple of years ago to about 6 to 7%. It's only in the early days that China's economy was growing at 10%. No economy as big as China or any other country can grow at that rate. So I think that to answer that question about rhetoric, misinformation, I think we need big forums like this. We need to keep tracks on what's going on and listen to people with different views and draw your own conclusions.
Any okay, please.
Yes, me. And as for my concern, all the data I have are from IMF, WTO. So even the rate,
sorry, you're out of date. I think the 10% was reached a couple of years ago. I think more than a couple of years ago. It slowed down to China's economy slowed down to 6 to 7, 8%.
Yes, it slowed down down during the pandemic, but
no, not during the pandemic. Nothing to do with the pandemic. Well, you look at your data very carefully again. So let's not spend time on that.
My data are from IMF and WTO. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, you look at the date. Look at the date of the time period. It's definitely, I'm pretty sure. I've studied this a long time. Anyway.
But I follow IMF and follow WTO.
Well, check again.
World Trade Organization,
check again.
International Money Fund.
I think that the professors...
They are not propaganda. I think
no, it's not propaganda.
Not propaganda. IMF and WTO, they are not
Professor
propaganda.
João, please.
Okay,
yes,
thank you.
And my point is to follow always international data from international organizations beyond any doubt and beyond any suspicions. I follow IMF, International Money Fund. I follow World Trade Organization data. So the numbers I put, there are numbers from these two organizations. So if there is some discrepancy with others, I follow the ones I thought they were more credible. So that's about propaganda. I remind Scott Lucas about the white helmets and the propaganda they made in Syria, and now we know who are the white helmets, what they were doing, and they are from the Muslim Brotherhood who want to make that there were really things happening that were not happening. It was a stage. They made the stage. Now we know who they are, but at the time being, during the Syria war, there are a lot of people believing on the white helmets. Even there were people proposing white helmets for international prizes, peace, Nobel Peace, for instance, and we must be very careful about that. Always reading lots of sources to know, and different sources from different perspectives, and at the end to take our own conclusions. So it's very important that, and I remind you, the white helmets in Syria.
Thank you. If I understood it rightly, Professor Ekrem, you wish to have a comment? Please.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Professor
Be very
Scott.
brief, please.
Yeah, I will be try to be very short. Because of the internet age, I think the internet have a disadvantage and advantage, because in the internet age, you can expose to very propaganda and the disinformation, but also the internet is also the key to get rid of this propaganda and the disinformation. If you confront any information or some news, you need to check it again, also double check it again to get rid of this disinformation and the propaganda. My study is theoretically, but there are many cases I examine. In this case, when I examine this case, I always check the information about the resource, not that one time, maybe double time, maybe 3 times. Like I said, internet is have a disadvantage to get exposed to propaganda, but also the key to get rid of the propaganda.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, our time has finished. In fact, it exceeded. We had, I believe, a very informative and interesting panel. Allow me a provocative, although small comment. Either explicitly or implicitly, how focused and centered we are all on the idea of order, international order. Recalling from Professor Ken Booth, I take the liberty to ask myself how much of a cliche exists on these new times. But on behalf of the entire audience, I compliment and once again thank our speakers for their very valuable contributions and also for their collaborative attitude. And equally, I compliment and thank the audience. Scott Lucas, sorry, we'll not have time for more.
I just wish to say one thing, sir, and that is the statement about the white helmets, which has just been made, is
5
actually
seconds,
a testament.
please. 5 seconds.
Yeah. The statement about the white helmets is testament to my question about disinformation indeed misinformation, because with respect to the speaker, that was an untrue statement about an organization in Syria established to rescue people and to save lives.
No,
And for that type of
no.
disinformation to make it into this forum,
Go,
I think is a
go
testament to the
behind.
dangers that we
Go and-
face. Thanks
go and
very
check.
much.
Go and check. Go and
Okay.
check, please.
Please.
Because
Okay.
the reason was they were retired. They took them out
Ma'am,
of the Nobel
you're-
Peace Prize.
Ma'am, you're spreading propaganda that is not true.
Okay,
I will
that's not
explain
okay.
tomorrow in my
have-
discussion.
Okay,
Go behind and
okay, I have to continue and we need to finish.
Thank you.
Let me remember that the next panel will start at 12 o'clock. Have a good day and thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be your moderator.
Thank you.